Good morning, everyone. We are back
Good
live.
morning.
Well,
Good morning.
happy Tuesday from the Explicit Measures Podcast. We're jumping back in with some more fun topics. We are live again. So, for those of you who are following along on the various social media channels, welcome. We appreciate you guys joining us live and asking questions. Feel free to chat us. We're simultaneously streaming this kind of multiple places now, so you can catch us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch, and on Facebook. Anyways, how's everyone doing? We were gone for a week. Mike was out. I guess our intro today is Mike was on vacation. So what did you do? So we took the family up north from where we live out in Milwaukee. We went up to Green Bay area. Went to a preseason Packer game. Kids enjoyed it. Hung out. Just kind of took it easy at an Airbnb. Had a wonderful time. Kids had a lot of fun. So it was definitely good. Time to be away, but glad to be back and in the saddle again.
Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday.
Good to be
Happy
back, gents.
Tuesday.
Good to be back.
Yeah, I think we actually have pretty good video quality today too. So that's
Yeah.
an improvement.
Amazing. The Field
Yeah,
of Dreams
it's-
doesn't come with good video.
That's a true statement.
Oh yeah, or a good voice.
Yeah,
Tommy does too much yelling there.
Goodness.
I think that was self-inflicted.
Yeah, that part was
True
self-inflicted.
statement.
The Matrix video quality was not. Oh my goodness.
Awesome.
So
Let's jump into
I'm
some
excited
topic
about
today.
this one.
That's okay. We're rusty. We've been out for a week.
Yeah, right.
It was weird not having to get up on Tuesday, Thursday, and think about getting a podcast ready to going. So that was a bit nice to have a week off. But we're back on it. This week we're talking about more of the adoption framework. So we're really interested in the article around the adoption framework roadmap, and this is called particularly the executive sponsorship. So I'm going to grab the link here and say, here's our topic today, and I'll put that in the chat window. And so, Tommy, just give me you've read the article, we've gone through it, we've kind of had some. We actually were a little bit late because we were discussing things beforehand, like what are we going to talk about? So we got started a little later this morning because we were getting into it already. We were like, oh shoot, we should just record and do it there. But Tommy, give us a quick overview. Let's probably define the topic first, right? So there's this concept of Power BI. We've been going through this adoption roadmap. One of these items on the roadmap is this idea of we should have an executive sponsor. What does that mean? What does that look like? So we're going to kind of talk about our interactions, what we've kind of held or had around what does an executive sponsor look like? How does that roll out, or how we've observed this in different organizations? So Tommy, give us kind of a brief summary of what does that mean to you?
It's funny, literally the discussion before we started recording, we talked about executive sponsor and executive support, but an executive sponsor or sponsorship at a company for Power BI is someone or maybe more than one person who has authority at an organization, usually higher up, has decision-making abilities that is bought into Power BI as the platform and the tool of use for an organization for users, report authors to adopt and be the one source of truth. But the executive sponsor is the one that can actually, again, be able to make decisions and has the authority to do so.
Seth, what would be your read on how would you define like an executive sponsor? Is that kind of on point with what you feel like it looks like, or is it something different from your own perspective?
I'm reminded of a very apt phrase all of a sudden, which is dollar bills, y'all. like ultimately it's about money, right? And you need, in order to do a lot of the adoption roadmap, you're going to need support, and that support comes in funding, and that's ultimately where the executive sponsor comes in from that standpoint. I think we have a lot to talk about related to the article and kind of how that breaks down, just from the standpoint of the two main areas that I see are, the top down, where you kind of already have that executive sponsorship, and maybe we can, briefly touch on like what that looks like.
Yeah.
But I think I'd like to spend more of the conversation in the bottom up approach, because that's where I think a lot of our listeners live. And what are the paths, for gaining executive sponsorship within a company? And that's where I think a lot of the challenging parts are.
So let's define some. So in the article, it talks about high level. It just kind of talks about some high level details, and it says there are multiple ways to identify an executive sponsor, and then you speak to these 2 points, Seth. The top down approach. This is kind of like coming from the C level portion of the organization. Someone at that level is saying, "This is the right direction. We see the vision for where we want to go with analytics," and it's kind of pushed from the leadership down across the organization. The bottom up approach is really what we're talking about. It's still an executive sponsor, so I still think we're talking about someone higher up in the organization. But this is really talking about, again, in the article, it's talking about an example here would be a business unit such as the finance unit has had great success inside Power BI. And so, because of that one department's success, there's kind of like this bubbling up effect. Like a leader, that team is able to voice and vocalize their success with the tool, and that is able to be communicated to leadership, which then can start driving C-level initiatives at a higher level in the organization. Um, one comment that Seth had made kind of as we were kind of pre-talking about this conversation was, I think that's kind of relevant here, is when we're starting to talk executive sponsors, these are individuals that I don't think we're talking about like an executive sponsor to say no to all other tools. I think what we're talking about here at the C-level executive sponsorship level is there is deliberate investment of the organization and time and planning being spent specifically around how to deploy Power BI or analytics in general. So I think there's a phrase here or maybe some thought around like I don't think this has to be only Power BI conversation around executive sponsorship, right? I think as long as you have leaders in your organization that value data and value breaking down data silos in your organization, I think that's my opinion here is I think that's kind of what they're trying to speak to here. Power BI may be one of the tools that are in the arsenal of your tools in your organization to be used by an executive sponsor. So I'm not ruling out other tools that may be used. I'm just saying like we're probably going to just focus our conversation around what happens at Power BI level.
It's interesting you say that because it's really any technology or platform a company is adopting
Sure.
um, that needs some sponsorship or support for it to roll out.
Correct.
You see this a lot in organizations where you have someone in the executive role or C-level role will kind of designate someone on other teams to kind of say, okay, you find a tool or platform or solution that will work for your team.
Agreed.
Right. And we'll give you the budget.
Yep.
They're not actually, going out themselves and saying, we need this tool. We need everyone to use this. Project managers, what tools do you need? Okay, we'll approve it.
Exactly.
That's kind of usually when I would consider the bottom up pattern, but the bottom up pattern's still about getting to the C level, because without a C level, someone who's actually dedicated in that particular product or solution, you're still going to have limitations. But from the Power BI point of view, again, you can have you can have someone in an executive role who's approved the licenses, who has hired data analysts, but they're not necessarily a active figure in the growth and the culture of data and Power BI in organization. So they may approve funding, right? But they might not do it in a proactive way. They may get people to use reports, but they're not going to do it in a proactive way. To me, that's the difference between just having someone who's an executive who is sponsoring Power BI and getting executive support. And I think there's a pretty big difference there.
Okay. I like those. Go ahead.
I like that distinction. Executive support is completely different in my mind than sponsorship. A sponsor is somebody who is aware that in that Power BI is a platform, a tool that is solving their business problems, right? To Mike's point, if we're going to cut down to what I think is the most relevant thing we can convey to the audience, right, is when we're talking executive level sponsorship, businesses care about solving problems.
Mm-hmm.
How fast they can get that answer and how much it will cost. time, and money, which we talk about all the time. They're not having tool conversations, right? The only way you can bring a tool conversation into that light is because it just does it better than every other tool out there, because it solves the problem faster, or the infrastructure and the organization as a whole is supporting that because people know how to use it. So like you're reducing how much time it takes to produce something, right? Making the case for saving money or making money is going to get you a lot further along in this conversation than Power BI is better than Tableau, or Power BI is better than Click, or
Sure.
Power BI is better, because those are tools. They aren't going to know all the nuances around like why one is better, right? Unless you can equate some of those key things that we do know and do think are differentiators around this tool versus others. And Mike and I have successfully like sold, right,
Hmm?
or pushed that idea into very large organizations when we were working together, where like it so far outweighs the benefits
Yep.
of any other tool, especially in Microsoft shops.
Yep.
It just does.
Yep.
But you need to be able to pitch the benefits of that in the realm of value to the organization. And sometimes that's really difficult depending on where in the org you are, right?
Yeah.
If you're the solo person and you're trying to build a data culture, right?
Yep.
Or build the adoption of Power BI, and you need this funding and support and executive sponsorship because you're hearing about this roadmap and you see a lot of the benefits here. It's a large road and a large initiative for you to do, because you need to build capital within the org to show these value things.
Correct. So here's a phrase. I think you're actually hitting the nail on the head here, and you're actually reiterating, I think, one of these strong points in the article that I think is really relevant for the bottom up approach, or a bottom up pattern, right? The bottom up approach is more likely to occur in smaller organizations because the return on investment, you're talking about, like, what's the bang for my buck here? How much time do I need to invest? How much money do I need to put into it? Because the return on investment and strategic imperative of data culture or the digital transformation is not an urgent priority of the C-level executives. And I think this is a really interesting phrase to me. So that one sentence puts a lot of things in perspective to me, because if you think about a smaller organization, they're focused on a lot of things. They're focused on, making that product, producing the things. There's a lot of initiatives that are there's a lot of hats being handled by a couple individuals. And to have this other analytics arm that's also part of the C-level organization, you may not have enough people or time, or people may be spread too thin already to get to that level. And so what happens is, in smaller organizations, you see that there is a team of people that are kind of just jumping onto this. To your points, Seth, right? We've already bought Excel. We're Excel shop, right? We have Power Query. That's something that's very familiar to us. Oh, wow, look at this. We found this Power BI thing that's free to download. We're able to do the same kind of Power Query level data transformations and start automating our data loads. Wow, that's adding a lot of value for us with a minimal amount of investment. So I think there's and much to Microsoft's credit, if you look at a lot of their other tools, there's there's a cost barrier to entry to get into those tools. Like, you need to buy something to get it going. The fact that you get Power BI Desktop for free, and the barrier to entry into this space is $0 to get started, I could see that Microsoft was very much leaning into this bottom up approach. Excel runs the world. Excel runs companies as it is today. And today there are individuals that, I was in a company that did this. A lot of what our decisions were made on extracts of data, pushing it through Excel, and getting some numbers down to an aggregated form so we could make decisions about things. That ran our business.
So, question: did you ever have an executive sponsor for Excel? Like your Excel data?
I wouldn't say it wouldn't be for Excel data, but I definitely think you had a centralization of leadership, understanding that the analytics, like, not every team had the same capability. Or let's say this: there was a strategic initiative to hire people that were very good analytically, to know how, like, even within the organization. I was in a different department. I was kind of running the call center at the time, and I got pulled into this analytic team because of my skills with Excel and being able to manipulate data and pull it together. So the organization had enough, knowledge, wherewithal to pull together people who were really sharp in the tools that they had for the business side. I'm talking purely from the business. IT side of the shop had a whole other realm of like very smart people trying to build, data marts, data warehouses, uh, you know, things that you would then pull together to let people um, grow that bottom up approach. So I guess what I'm saying is, let me see if I can consolidate my thoughts a little bit better here. I think I think that the companies that I've been a part of have made data and analytics an important enough process that they are willing to go find talent that is good in that area, either whether it be Excel or whether it be data modeling, or and then what is applied is executive level people come back to that team and say, I have these kinds of questions. um, where are our sales going? Who's our biggest competitor? Let's get product master data together. Like there's some strategic questions that we know is important to the organization, and so those questions came down to this analytical team, and they were tasked to figure it out anyway, any means necessary. So you technically never had an Excel sponsor. It just seemed like Excel was the most versatile, available tool, and you could go ask for at other tools, but that was like the most available tool you could go get.
Well, and I would bet too, especially in the Excel era, it wasn't just Excel. It was usually like your CRM system had some reporting, your marketing, system had some reporting, your product, life cycle system had some reporting. The one thing I think with Power BI that's a little different is it kind of, well, the goal more or less is that the data is centralized in one platform, right? So it's kind of where everyone's looking. The one thing that I thought was very interesting with the article about an executive sponsor, and I think different from just from the Excel point of view, is they say like ensure that this person has a vested interest in the success of analytics and understands the value and the impact.
Yep.
So this isn't just someone who's saying, hey, we need a few data analytics people. We need some data around our sales numbers. We need data around our customer numbers. This is someone who should be proactive. That is more than just, oh, we have a BI platform. Great. Do we need to hire someone? Did someone tell me I should hire someone? Or is this someone who's trying to understand the success and people using Power BI and people going to Power BI and the accuracy and the maturity of the reporting and the sharing? So I really love that part of it. And I think rather than just assigning someone an executive sponsor role where they're like, great, I funded the licensing, I funded premium, I have other things to do. That to me, that does not fit the need of what an executive sponsor is, because that proactive role, being a sponsor, is again being that support where they are looking to you, the data champion or the BI team, to say like, what are our success metrics? To how are we rolling this out? How many reports are out there? How many people are using Power BI? What are the requests like? But they're also understanding too, like what do they need to do? So it's understanding success metrics to roll it out, but it's also understanding that people should start using those reports. So they have to be more proactive, I think. I think that's just, it's a prereq for being an executive sponsor.
This is kind of a weird, like, I'm feeling like this is like a weird topic because there's so many points with an executive sponsor. Tom, you kind of sent out a little bit of an agenda beforehand, and one of the things I'd like to talk about would be what are some like what are some good practices, or some, there's in the article, it says there are considerations or key actions for having an executive sponsor. Reading through those considerations or key actions in the article, is there anything that sticks out to you about what you would like to see an executive sponsor do? And so I'll throw my first one in here, kind of around, what these executive sponsors are doing. I like this. The executive sponsor is, so one thing I think is very important here is bullet point number 2 for me is there needs to be an identified someone that has a sufficient position of influence and authority to understand the value and impact of business intelligence. So I think what happens sometimes, particularly in like getting access to data sources. So again, I'm going to kind of fabricate a scenario here. I'm in a department, I'm in a team, I'm working on getting some data out of some sort of data extract system. We all know that going to business objects and dropping out a CSV dump file of tables and then mashing it up with other data sources is not the best or most optimal way of connecting your data, right? I prefer not to continually consume things from CSV and Excel files if at all possible. So I think one area to know if you're getting executive sponsorship level is there's an individual in your organization that is able to go talk to other teams and figure out if there is data that you need or giving you, helping you work through the credentials issue to go connect to more of these data sources with a more secure connection. I think that's, that's an indicator of you're going to run into roadblocks. You're going to hit a wall. You're going to need premium. You're going to need to figure out how to embed things. Something's going to uh, stop you or slow you down in your initiative. And those executive sponsors are more in those conversations around, okay, how are you getting blocked? How can I help unblock you? Because we think the questions you're answering with the BI and analytics is valuable enough that we want to push through those challenges. Thoughts?
So,
I,
as I
I,
said,
I thought that.
part
Go ahead.
lost in thought. So, um, yeah, part of that key considerations, the influence and authority is again someone who has a vested interest, and I really do love that because it's part of that authority and a vested interest. It's someone who can also again not necessarily dictate, but can speak to the people under them, the directors, the different department heads, to say we're going to be using Power BI. Here's this is our here's the reports that we're going to be using. These are the people who are going to be creating reports. This is our single source of truth. And they have to be someone who can dictate that, or at least begin that movement, especially if you have an older platform. If you're using Excel, if you're using Zoho, if you're using again some legacy tool or some one-off tool for a particular one data source.
Mm-hmm. Would you expect your executive sponsor to periodically check in with the team or drive, like, who drives the initiatives? Is it all coming from the executive sponsor, or is it
No,
coming from like he's listening to the BI team and asking for what do we need to get done, or is he setting the
no,
higher level road objectives to you got to go hit?
right. So, okay, so let's break down understands the value and impact, and they have a vested interest. They're probably not putting together the game plan or the roadmap for adoption, but they sure as heck want to know what it looks like. They want to see the long-term goals and know what the long-term goals are. So I don't think they're necessarily putting that together, but they're relying on the BI team or someone from BI to basically say, here's what adoption looks like. Here's what we need to do in order to move from point A to point B in terms of getting people to not be overwhelmed by Power BI. Because this person's probably hearing too from whether it's in quarterly meetings, whether or not reporting's good or bad. They're hearing the complaints and they're hearing if people are using other software. They're not putting together the initiatives and the roadmap, but they're sure as heck relying on someone to put that together. And they have I think they still have some long-term goals on what they want to see.
Dan brings
I,
up an
I
interesting.
think
Oh, go ahead.
I think your point was too granular, right? Like I
Okay.
don't see an executive sponsor getting in the weeds at all. Like this is the person that you've convinced that holds the purse strings and can make a convincing argument about why Power BI is the solution for your organization, right? So that when other people come in and they're like, I'm a Tableau guy, you're like, yeah, that's great, but fun. We've made strategic decisions to start supporting Power BI, right? Like that is what goes on resumes. That's the people and the skill sets that you hire for, right? Like
Sure.
you're that's what that person can do, right? They can fund premium, they can fund pro licenses to
Correct.
share, those things and make that or argument on a generic level in those conversations when they need to be had, right? The challenge, and I think executive means executive. It doesn't mean leader, it doesn't mean manager, it doesn't mean director, because each one of those levels is reporting to the person who's ultimately making the decisions. And to Tommy's point, they dictate and have the power to dictate the direction of the company. how many times we all know somebody who comes in at an executive level and is like, I'm a microstrategy guy, that's what we're doing. And the org's like, okay, well, we hired you to be the, chief data guy. Like, we're going to follow your lead.
Yep.
And there's a huge disruption in the organization as they pivot because that's the direction. Like, I'm sorry. Like, if you're so far in other directions and you're the lone Power BI guy, you're probably going to fail, right? Like, if your organization is a Microsoft shop and you have a lot of connections and like there's just, it makes a lot of sense that Power BI get plugged in and that adoption can grow and you can teach and show people. I think it goes a long way, right? I do want to make, like, I think my points that are relevant from the bottom up of trying to get an executive sponsor, right? Because we've kind of hammered on it's about solving business problems, right? But you have to show people, like, from the bottom up. You're the report person who's using Power BI. Like, you have to find a problem and solve it, and that means, like, let's start with your manager. What are the everybody's always got something that's like, I don't have visibility into this data. I don't understand what this is doing, and Power BI is a tool that allows us to go grab tons of data, aggregate it, and provide insight. There's a ton of value there, and for many people, they may not understand that their request is actually a 1 hour exercise that you can go do because you've learned Power BI and you've done it well, right? So I think, like, you need that organic growth. You need to convince your first tier, then it's the second, then it's the third. So you're going through director, VP, or if there's a channel, I guess, to the executives, and you can solve a big problem for them in a really short period of time, I think that's where you convince them, at least initially, or pique their interest, that this is a tool that solves problems quickly. And you need to convince people that this is the route to go, and you do that by solving their problems, not by preaching a tool. I think at the same time, you need to have a pitch. Why is Power BI better than whatever else your organization is doing? And
Mhm.
Mike, to your point, maybe you're an Excel only shop. Well, there's a ton of automation.
Yep.
Maybe you're a Tableau shop. Well, we can centralize and everybody knows Excel, and we can streamline these processes with Power Query, and we can stand up an AS instance where you can support your Tableau while you're doing, rebuilding things in Power BI.
Sure.
Like, it's all of the ancillary stuff around it that makes it such a fantastic tool that we love and talk about, as well as support,
Yep.
that makes it a great tool for organizations that want to have a successful data strategy, right? It's a great piece of that. But I think that's, there is this progression that you need to go through, because if you stop at director level, you're always, and you may have some funding in your part of the organization, it doesn't mean that executive can't be like, we're now doing this.
There's some
So
interesting discussion happening on YouTube, particularly around this one. One of them made by Dan was talking around the executive sponsor, particularly like a C-level individual, probably should be listening to the center of excellence and not just a centralized BI team. So there's a concept of engaging this, having a larger community that's able to voice or bubble up
Sure.
things all the way to the top if they need to. And then some other individuals are saying there's been some I think Gina is commenting around, you know, there seems to be some issues with the C-level part of the organization is so far removed from what's really happening in the Power BI level that they're not making a good fit as your executive sponsor.
And do you have more of um
The
a
bottom up,
problem
um,
yeah,
no, do you have an organizational problem around data, right? And how much, what is the term, I'm data culture,
data culture. Yeah.
right.
right?
Well,
Like, if you don't
yeah,
have a C-suite person that is engaged and understands the value of a data culture, that's that's a problem.
y-
And I'm not saying also, like, to some of the other chat going on, that, like, you have to have it, like, executive leadership for any Power BI adoption to work. I'm not saying that. Yeah, of course it can. But I'm saying, if you don't have it, that you're not on a solid ground totally, right?
Hmm.
I mean, you don't have the buy-in, at the highest levels, and that is important.
well, let's take a step back as we talk about Power BI as the solution. The solution to what? And when we're talking about, again, whether it's Power BI,
Hmm.
it's not the end. It's not just having Power BI used in an organization. It's a means to an end, and that end is really having a set, final context around the data, being able to have corporate KPIs, term, universal definitions, and having KPIs that can be reported from different teams all the way to the corporate level. And that these KPIs again have context, they have targets, and that's part of data culture too. And we talked about this with the data culture, where you find a lot of departments and users a little refrained or hesitant with not just using Power BI, but when we're developing like core KPIs and showing percentage increase or decrease, because usually they think it's a reflection on their performance. So an executive sponsor understands, again, not just the value of Power BI, but they understand the value of Power BI as that solution to help develop and mature these like the corporate metrics, and that it can be the central source, because that has to happen first. If you don't, it doesn't matter if your executive sponsor loves Power BI. This person, one, I'm going to say, if you want success, it's got to be someone in C-level. Start with someone not necessarily that loves the product. Start with someone who understands the need for common terminology, common business logic around the data, rather than siloed systems. That we so
So
that
I like that
and
point.
then you can, yeah.
So I think there's, to me, I'm going to take a very broad stroke at what this is looking like. I'm going to kind of come back up here at a very high level, right? At the end of the day, there have been choices that have been made to collect data from sales, from manufacturing, whatever your business is. There's a lot of data in different departments based on the tools that you've been provided or you bought to run that part of the organization. Like some companies run Dynamics 365. That's the tool they use to run their business in. So like there's these software applications that make, create, or do something with data, right? You may have multiple tools, right? We may have a different one for marketing,
Right.
all these different tools. And I think the challenge, if I had to step way back here and say, what are problems at an organization? The problem is we have all these different software applications that are making data, and they do a decent job of reporting within their own right. But the challenge becomes is like, how do I get data out of the marketing tool and match it up with my production data? Or how do I get my financial information to match up with my production information? Someone, somewhere in the organization is building a process to bring that data together. And I think the value of the organization, again, picking this way back up to the executive level, right? Their value is to see, like, hey, I have these many different areas of data across my organization, and we know we need to. It's a I think this is I hope it's a common thought at an organization. We know we need to grab that information and pull it together. And this is why you see initiatives around like, let's build a data warehouse. Let's pull all this information in from multiple sources and put it in a centralized location. I think if that so stepping back, right? So again, that's the high level picture. We have this data, it's being generated, we need it to come together. Once we start getting this idea around like there's an executive leader that understands that there are multiple data silos and is caring enough to try and bring or you grab all this information and find that there's more value in the data together than it is separate in each of the different parts. To Seth's point, I think he's been the whole time here is like the executive sponsor should be saying, hey, we're finding great success from this tool called Power BI. It's helping us either grab this data from disparate sources, it's finding value in different business units or having success there. Let's see what else we can do with it and pull this out and roll this out more across the organization, because at the end of the day, we need to answer questions that are merging or bringing multiple data sets together, whether that be is like, we're going to build a better data mart, and then that will consume Power BI will consume from there. We at the each organization team, finance, whoever those are, each team needs to look at that data and do something with it, make decisions on information that they're finding from these source systems.
I think that that's great context to kind of what Kevin brought up in the YouTube chat,
Yep.
right? Is the big win, and what I kind of mean
Hmm?
by solving the big problem.
Yeah.
I'm glad you went through that, because it reminded me of the excitement that I had when I first was working with Power BI.
Yes. Yeah.
In and that is what you can bring to people who don't know,
Yep.
right? Because a lot of people in whatever level of the organization, if you go and you say, hey, what is the largest data problem you have, 9 times out of 10, right? A ton of them are going to be like, well, the sales data is over here. I need this in here and that and there. And there aren't many tools that can do, or none, right? In the way that you're like, okay, how about I get you some preliminary idea, right? Of what that looks like
Mm-hmm.
in this time frame, and make sure that time frame, I guarantee you, is going to be X number faster, or going to be like, they're going to expect that sort of thing in months, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can bring that in and say, I can give you something in 3 days that shows you this,
Yep.
that is where people go, what?
You knock people's
How
socks off.
how
Yeah.
how are you doing that, right? Like,
Yep.
and it may not be the full productionalized solution,
Yep.
but this is where the whole think like the business, act like ID comes from.
Yep.
Power BI allows you to think like the business. What is the problem? I will solve that for you as quickly as I possibly can, and I guarantee that it's not going to be the IT 6 month, pulling data from 6 different systems to then look at it. I will pull it together right now, and I will give you a snapshot. Maybe not the whole thing, but I will give you a view of what you're asking for in a far shortened period of time.
Yep.
And then when I give that to you, we can go build it. But
Yep.
at least you'll have your answer.
Correct.
And that you can do that at every level, all the way up to the executive chain. Like, and if those are the big things, right? Why am I losing sales
Yep.
when I just invested, $300,000 in marketing?
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Like, where was the
Right.
breakdown?
Yeah. How much?
Right?
How many?
Data set,
Yep.
analyze in Power BI, huge win,
Yep.
right? And when you show leaders that you can bring those insights that rapidly, that's the reason you use Power BI.
Yep. And I think that's. And again, I can't. Kevin was the gentleman I think who brought up the comment around get a big win with Power BI, and
Right.
once you start finding the speed of what you're doing is quicker than what you've been traditionally doing, or the meaningful vision of the data, or whatever those pieces are, right? That's a strategic strategy that I use when I talk with organizations around Power BI. Like, let's find a hard problem, let's go solve it quickly, let's make it an easier, let's remove people's pain. Like we talk about this all the time. Like, the only way to drive adoption is people are lazy. They want things to be simple, right? People don't want to have to do a lot of work to get to the answer. So anywhere we can look at a difficult process and make it easier to get information or get that answer that question, the more people will like and adopt it, I think.
And you know what that C-level person cares about? What you can show them that solution is they don't care if it bar charts, a better format in one tool or another. They just want the ability of like, hey, I want to look at total members. Oh, look, I can see the members by state, just like that. You want to see, total sales by rep? We can do that in a second.
Simple
Yeah.
aggregations, right?
Yeah, seriously. But being able to and then connect it all together and have it in one interface.
Yeah.
And again, so saying like we can do this, we can build this. That executive sponsor is also going to be one that is going to have to, I don't want to say make tough decisions, but there's going to be moments where they're going to be meeting with teams and departments who are still using some siloed data set. Like, again, it could be some marketing platform or that's reporting, hey, we had 15 million from ads. We're saying, hey, we're going to be using this report from now on. We're using Power BI to look at our marketing data. This is our source of truth.
That was a point I wanted to bring up earlier, was like the executive sponsor is probably using your Power BI reports or pointing to them or pointing other people to where those reports are and like say, here's our story of truth. It lives here. This is what we're doing.
Right.
So I think that's another great aspect of what we're looking at executive sponsors is not only are they actively engaged in pushing the team to answer these deeper questions, but they're also using the tool and pointing people to the tool and saying, well, this is let's call it, for lack of a better term, certified data sets. This is where we look for the truth of our business. I've put people around this to make sure the data is accurate and correct, and that executive sponsor is vouching, putting his mark on that data.
Right.
I like that a lot.
But you made them the believer, right? Like,
yeah.
And by nature, right? Like, if you get their buy-in, right? That means funding, And the wider adoption is a result of you continuing to solve their problems and them sharing those reports with the executive team, or
Exactly.
and then it's not, you're just trying. Then you get into this second thing of who's the
Mhm.
backup, right?
Mhm.
Because and like think think of it like viral adoption. Like that's what it's about. It's about spreading the love of Power BI as much as possible throughout an organization, right?
I mean, not to speak out of turn here, but I think Seth, you found some good wins in this too. Like you're doing a good job when in your organization you're solving problems, and you can see other organizations or other parts of the organization that are having problems, and you can reach into them and solve their problems too. I know I know we Seth and I worked on a project where we
Sure.
we were in our department, BI and analytics, and we were looking at other areas, and there was a team that needed some help. Essentially, we're able to then quickly go into there and with leaderships kind of like, hey, go help this team out, or go solve this problem. We're able to identify, hey, we got a better solution, a faster way of solving this problem. We can reach in this other team and solve these problems and provide them a tool back that made their life so much easier. And I think that's when you start really finding like your stride in an organization, where you can start seeing like, not only are we impacting our team, but we're able to reach in and help out other teams and show them there's a better way, and provide them tooling and reports and things that are just happening that allow other teams to make good decisions.
I think one part of this too is, as we've talked about, this sponsor who is in love with Power BI now, if they're in a sense becoming the executive sponsor and the support, and that person, well, in a sense, they're putting their credibility out there too. If
That's
it's not
true.
just, hey, do you want to be the executive sponsor of Power BI? Sure. Okay, let's move on. If
Yeah.
they're saying that, right?
Yes.
If they're saying that, they're putting their own credibility and their authority on the line. So
Agreed.
this person should expect something out of you if you're the one selling to them, or the BI team, or whoever. um, Maybe it's the center of excellence. On Again, it's not just, are people using Power BI, but do we have these
Sure.
metrics? People, they're hearing the feedback, they're using Power BI or trying to use it for their reports, and maybe it's overwhelming, maybe they don't know how to do some of the functionality with the filter pane, or they're hearing feedback from the different departments where the numbers are ambiguous. Well, that's going to come back to you. And just because you have a sponsor doesn't mean that, good, they'll take care of everything. You need to come with what you are going to need from them, where either it's like micro situations where, like, hey, sales isn't really using, the report, they're still relying on Salesforce, or to look at their numbers, even though we have that in Power BI and we have it integrated with everything. So or other situations where, there's pushback, so to speak,
Hmm.
or other things where you're like, this is having that long term milestones that you foresee for Power BI to get that adoption and that data culture on. We need to define metrics, and we need a better help desk. Here's the things that we want to do. We're going to do training. That person needs to know that you're invested too, and that you have the game plan. Because even if they say, yeah, let's do this, and people are just creating reports, but there's no long road or roadmap looking ahead,
Hmm.
they're either going to lose interest, or frustration comes to you. But you are just as responsible as they are to provide to them what the roadmap is, to keep them um, invested, and to continue to get their support.
I mean,
I, I want to jump in here
I-
because I think
go ahead.
data culture is what you're speaking to, I think, a lot there. And I think this is really a good point, right? We can't assume we can go into an organization. We can't run an entire organization on one person. We just can't. There has to be this level of like, we have to be able to find successes in certain areas with an executive sponsor. We have to have some direction that's putting their money behind this. They're hiring the right people. I think that initiative kind of comes from the executive sponsor, but it goes beyond this. And I think there's a great integration point between that executive sponsor and the center of excellence, and making sure that
Mhm.
people can self-serve some of this stuff. Right? We're talking about some very large blockers that we're removing because of Power BI, but I still think there's a lot of value that can be found in individual departments that are not sharing data. They're just becoming more efficient in whatever they're doing. They're able to, people in different departments could drive their own data culture to a degree. And I think that executive sponsor is, he's only so you can only do so much, right? So I think it's
Right.
important for that person to invest their time into a plan. To your point, Tommy, what does data culture look like at our organization? How do we continue to grow it? And maybe the tools Power BI for today, maybe tomorrow some other tool, Microsoft or some other company comes up with that's even better or cheaper or more effective than what we have right now. Probably will be at some point. There'll probably be another thing out there. But like that executive sponsor needs to have that data culture be part of like the company branding, and he needs to figure out how he can partner with a couple people that can scale for more of the organization. And I think there's a really good point to say like you need to have integration points with the center of excellence because that scales.
I mean, so I like the direction, right? I think it's a potentially another. Well, let's follow it out, right? What is an executive sponsor as it relates to the wider adoption roadmap, right? You need the funding. You
Mhm.
need to convince them that this is
Yes.
the path that the
Right.
organization wants to go. And then to Tommy's point, all of the strategic initiatives come out of the executive team. So
Yes.
the executive support comes from the sponsor, who's likely the chief data officer or chief, the data person who makes those decisions in your organization, and guaranteed they will have at least some, if not all of these parts as support mechanisms throughout the organization if they have any sort of like data culture. If
Yep.
you don't, right? Like, are you leading the charge into these different areas? I would hope not, right?
Right.
Like the push to get one then has to matriculate or push down into existing infrastructure or these types of things that would need to then support the training of Power BI, the proliferation. What is it? Is it replacing something or is it enhancing something? Right. And
Hmm.
smaller orgs might have a faster path forward because these are mixed roles with different people and you have less bodies involved. But if it's a larger organization, those paths then push down a lot of that um, adoption,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
Is a longer path, and that's I think where you need for sure to like. It may be hard getting here to get the funding and the support, but that's strategic in all of the Power BI roadmap
Yeah.
of having everything else adopted because none of that happens without an organization going, yes, this is that makes sense because this is whatever pain it may cause in displacing a tool or moving into a different one,
Yep.
it's going to make sense in the long term because I'm convinced that it will.
Yep. I definitely think there's this. I think the executive sponsor needs to have goals for his yearly goals are tied to something
Sure.
around this BI
Mhm.
initiative, whatever that may be, whatever tool you're using. There's got to be some level of, this chief data officer, this CIO, whatever that person is that's kind of running BI in your organization. I think there has to be some sort of goals around being able to produce reporting or produce data to users that can either self-serve or canned reports to them that help them do their job. And I think that's fundamentally what their job is. A portion of their job will be some of that. I think we nail it. I'd like to, if you guys don't mind, I don't know if we're cutting it off too early here, but I'd like to transition just really quick. At the end of the article, it talks about maturity levels. And I think one of the things that I think we've tried to do pretty well in these conversations around the Power BI adoption roadmap is there are maturity levels that are called out inside this documentation. And I think it's very interesting to know or look through the different levels that are there. At the very end of the article, it talks about a 100 level to 500 level, talking about the initial uh, investiture of a executive sponsor all the way up to an efficient executive sponsor. And I want to encourage people to take a look at the maturity levels and kind of, as your organization, look at where you think you are, what level you think you're in. And I think the article gives some good examples of what the next level should look like, right? So we want to think of this as like this is a journey for everyone, right? I don't think there's maybe some organizations out there, but there's probably always better ways of doing things or things that we can learn from other people. And I think this article is a good way of helping us learn from like, okay, let's look at where our executive sponsors sit in our organization. Are we at the initial stage? Are we in a repeatable phase? Are we defining who the executive sponsor is or not? Are we in the 400 level where it's calling it capable, or are we in the 500 level where we say we have an efficient process to engage an executive sponsor? And I think this is a good point just to kind of say, don't get discouraged. Find out where you're at on the roadmap, and then just look a little bit ahead. Try and just do a couple things to improve your standing, to communicate value, to move up that maturity level for an executive sponsor. Thoughts on that?
I think that's a good wrap up.
Okay.
I love it.
Awesome.
If you're stuck in maturity level 300, though, be wary, because it just says there's an arrangement between C-level and support, which is very ambiguous. So try to get out of that as fast as possible.
Well, so looking at the one, so that's when we talked about it kind of beforehand, was this 300 level defined, right? There's a formal arrangement for a C-level sponsorship and support, well understood with expectations for the role. A little bit vague, I think, for that defined level. But looking ahead on what the 400 level looks like, a senior level support is in place to grow and sustain investment in Power BI. And I think that's where we're talking about. Maybe the capable area is we're now talking like engaging more with the Center of Excellence, listening to customer feedback. And then on the 500 level, right, now we're talking about like there are measurable goals in place. Like the executive sponsor is saying, these are things I want to hit. We want to have these data sources, handed out. We want to have X number of users in these tools. There's actually strategic goals. We need a data dictionary for a couple of our key data sources. We need certified data sets. These are standing behind that, and they're counting or measuring things that can be reported back as, did we succeed or did we not succeed? So I think if that 300 level is just kind of like hard to kind of put your head around. But as you look on the other levels above it, you can kind of see what you fall into or what you don't fall into based on those other higher levels. Good points. All right. And with that, I think we're at a wrap. Tommy, where can you find the Explicit Measures podcast?
You can find the Explicit Measures podcast anywhere podcasts are available, Apple, Spotify. We do live stream every Tuesday and Thursday morning, 7:30 a.m. Central. You can find it on YouTube, LinkedIn. Viral adoption. If you go online, you probably will see the podcast. One thing we ask is, regardless of where you watch or how you join the conversation, like, subscribe, but also tell someone. If you really enjoy the content and you enjoy the conversation, tell someone else. We love having the community here. So
yeah,
tell one more person.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate your time, and we hope you found a little bit of value of us discussing what an executive sponsorship is. Go check out the article from Microsoft. That's probably the best place to go find more information, read through it, think about it, and see how that plays out inside your organization. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you on Thursday.